All right, welcome to iLectureOnline, and in this video we're going to talk about vector notation. In the first video we talked about what vectors were. Vectors are quantities that are representing such force and velocity which have both magnitude and direction. But how do we notate that? Well, we did say that vectors graphically are represented by arrows. The length of the vector represents how large the quantity is, what the magnitude is, and the direction of the arrow represents the direction in which that thing is acting. In the case of a force, we write F for force, and notice how we always draw a little arrow on top of that letter. So the little arrow on top of the F means that it's a vector quantity. It has magnitude and direction. And let's say that the force has a magnitude of, let's say, 7 newtons. 7 newtons. So we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It has the length of 7 units, and so each unit representing 1 newton, so the total length of that vector is 7 newtons, and it's pointing to the right. And if you put a Cartesian coordinate system down, so that up would be in the y direction and to the right would be in the x direction, we can say that this is in the positive x direction, and so it has a magnitude of 7 newtons. It's pointed to the right in the positive x direction, so we can write that F, the force, is equal to 7 newtons, which is the magnitude part, times x with a little symbol on top, looks like a little hat, and that represents that it's in the x direction. Now, the fact that 7 newtons is positive means that it's a positive, in the positive x direction. If I had put a little negative in front of it, then the force would have been acting to the left. Now, to clarify a little bit more, let's see, here's another example. Let's say we have a soccer ball which is moving upward at a velocity of, let's say, 4 meters per second. So we can see that the length of the vector, it has 4 units. So the magnitude is 4 meters per second. And the direction is in the positive y direction. So if I want to talk about the velocity, I can say velocity, of course, I draw a little arrow on top indicating that's a vector quantity, is equal to the magnitude part, which is 4 meters per second. And usually we do put the units in there. Now the direction is in the positive y direction, so I'll put a y with a little symbol on top that looks like a little hat. Now, what is this x with the little hat, and what is this y with the little hat? What does that really mean? Well, x with a little hat and y with a little hat like that, that means that's a unit vector. So these things here are considered what we call unit vectors. Now, unit vector is a vector that only has a length of 1 unit. So when I multiply the unit vector by the magnitude, it doesn't change the length or the magnitude of that magnitude. That sounds kind of weird. It doesn't change the size of that magnitude. It does point in direction. So x hat simply means a vector that points in the direction of the x-axis and is only 1 unit long. And the y with a little hat on top is simply a vector in the y direction that is 1 unit long. So if I multiply a vector that is 1 unit long in a particular direction, multiply that times the magnitude, I have now a physical representation or mathematical representation of what that is. So the force is 7 newtons pointing in the x direction. The velocity is 4 meters per second pointing in the y direction or moving in the y direction. All right, in the later video, we're going to look at vectors that don't point in the x or the y direction, but at some angle, but that gets a little bit more complicated, and we'll show you how to do that later. But before we go on, what we want to also show is that in mathematics sometimes they don't use x hat, y hat, and of course z hat for the third dimension. They use I, j, and k. So we can say that x hat can also be written as I hat. It means exactly the same thing. It's a unit vector in the x direction, but mathematics texts will sometimes use that. Y hat can be represented by k, and z hat can be represented by I. Oh, I skipped one. Sorry about that. Y is j, and z is k. So alphabetically, x, y, z can be represented by I, j, k, which are the 3 dimensions in the x direction, y direction, and z direction. So I could have very well have written this as force is equal to 7 newtons in the I direction. And here I could have written that the velocity is equal to 4 meters per second in the j direction. Simply means unit vector in the x direction, unit vector in the y direction, but we write I in j. All right, so that's how we deal with vector notation. In the next few videos, we'll have a few more examples of how we write more complicated scenarios, and then we'll get a good feel for how we do that.